property. Scott gets out of the car and approaches Clyde.
Okay, Mr. Hanks, what now? Follow me.
Clyde is scared out of his mind, but he can't let Scott see it. They walk into the house.
Okay, Scott, up here. There is something that I want to show you.
As they walk upstairs, Scott stops to look at the paintings on the wall. The face of a demon appears in the painting and disappears.
Did you see that? See what? Oh, come on. There was a monster in that painting. Now it's gone. Scott, are you alright? Yeah, I'm fine.
Scott gives Clyde a cold stare, who begins to feel a little uneasy.
Because your face is white as a sheet. Now that you mention it, I don't feel so hot. And it's gotten a little chilly in here. Now, did you want to show me something? After all, my time is money, you know. I understand. Let's go.
The two walk up the stairs and enter Clyde's bedroom. Still apprehensive about the malevolent presence lurking somewhere in the house, both men glance in the direction of the closed bathroom door.
What's that? I don't know. Sounds like it came from the bathroom. I think we ought to leave.
All of the lights in the house flicker. Then bulbs pop all over the house, immersing the two men in darkness. The bathroom door flies open, and standing before them is a creature adorned in a blue tattered robe, its face replaced with a skull, with hollow sockets where its eyes should have been. Two pinpoints of light focus on the two men. There is an aura of light coming from behind it. In a commanding but gravelly voice it speaks.
Who dares violate my sanctuary?
Clyde turns to look at Scott.
Now do you believe me?
Scott had seen enough. Before Clyde could say,
"Let's get the hell out of here,"
Scott is already down the stairs and out the front door. Clyde looks back. Upon seeing the entity approach, he slowly backs away. The creature moves its arms in the sign of the infinity, causing it to levitate off the ground and float toward Clyde. At that point, everything seems to move in slow motion as Clyde runs toward the stairs. He looks back and sees the creature pursuing him. He loses his balance and tumbles down the stairs, rising to his feet with only a few bumps and bruises, and runs outside to his car. He opens the door on the driver's side, gets in, reaches into his pocket, searches for the keys, checks his left pocket, nothing. He switches to his left pants pocket and feels bits of metal. He pulls out a set of keys, finds the car key, and inserts it into the ignition.
Come on.
He turns it clockwise, but it will not start. The creature bears down on him, waving its hands in a circular motion. A blue light fires from its palms, shattering the driver's side window. Clyde opens the passenger side, gets out of the vehicle. The creature levitates and floats to the car.
My only chance is to escape into the forest.
Clyde runs into the forest. He can hear branches rustling behind him. He looks back and sees the dark specter floating through the trees.
It's gaining on me.
The further Clyde moves into the forest, the darker it becomes. Tired and cold, he keeps running. 20 minutes non-stop. His heart feels like it wants to explode. Totally exhausted, he leans on an old oak tree, fatigued and out of breath. He collapses to the forest floor and falls asleep. An hour later, Clyde wakens from his slumber, disoriented, cold, and more importantly, he was lost. He ponders what to do next, as images of death haunt his mind. He begins to hyperventilate. In a fit of panic, he rises to his feet and begins to run. The forest comes alive as light and shadow play tricks with his mind, distracting him from the real sinister presence that is still stalking him. As the sunlight fades, Clyde hears a low-pitched humming sound. It is coming from everywhere all at once. He continues running as portals begin to appear all around him, summoning all manner of beasts and demons from the netherworld. Clyde's only chance is to find a way out and get to the nearest town before the sun sets. He draws up the last of his strength and stammers forward. Rustling sounds coming from all around him, moving through the trees. Emerges a creature about 3 feet tall, with bat-like ears, covered in black fur and rows of razor-sharp teeth. Startled by the creature, Clyde stops running and presses his back against a tree, but the fiend does not notice him. He slowly backs away from the creature, loses his footing, and trips over a medium-sized boulder. Oh! When he stands up, there is a sharp pain that races down his right leg.
It's broken.
He tries to get his bearings as otherworldly sounds continue to fill the forest air. The moon lights up the sky as Clyde backs up against a tree, exhausted, scared, and cold. Time passes. The temperature drops down to a bone-chilling 5 degrees. Clyde sits in the darkness, shivering as hypothermia begins to set in. The skull-faced creature has found him and closes in. It reaches around the tree with its skeletal hand and grabs Clyde around the throat, who struggles to break free, but is in no shape to resist as the creature chokes the life from his body. On the drive back, Scott's conscious mind begins to play tricks with him. He sees images of himself running out of the house with Clyde calling for help as the creature rips him to pieces.
Damn, no one can know about this. Damn, Clyde, I'm sorry, man. Got to pull it together. You're Scott Ray, mega agent.
In his present state of mind, Scott tries to come up with what he thinks is a solid reason to condone what he did or did not do.
I wasn't there. That's it. Scott, old boy, you're in the clear.
Later on that night, Scott is sitting at his office, mulling over the day's events and planning a schedule for tomorrow.
Gwen, make sure all the lights are turned off in the office when you leave, okay?
Sure, Mr. Ray.
All of the lights are turned off in the building, except in Scott's office. Scott's secretary enters the room.
Good night, sir.
Good night. 10 minutes later, and all is quiet. Scott continues sifting through his paperwork. He comes across a form that has disclosure written on the front page. He looks it over and sees Clyde's new address on it. Out of the darkness, a disembodied voice speaks. It echoes throughout the entire building. Scott jumps to his feet and looks around.
All right, who the hell said that? Clyde, is that you?
No one answers. Scott shrugs it off and goes back to what he was doing. He continues his work without further incident. Later on that night, he arrives home, tired and hungry. He opens the door and walks toward the kitchen to get a bite to eat. He sits down to a meal of prime rib, baked potato with chives, green beans, and a glass of Chablis. Fully content, he takes a shower, turns off the lights, climbs into bed, and turns on the television. An hour into his favorite television program, he falls asleep. The Star-Spangled Banner plays in the background. An open window allows a gentle breeze to blow into the room. The doorbell rings. Scott wakes up and looks at the alarm clock. What's that? Scott rises to his feet, puts on his robe, and walks into the living room. He looks through the peephole and sees no one.
A practical joker, huh? I'll fix you in the morning.
He turns to walk away when he hears a low moaning sound and turns to face the door. He hesitates, then looks through the peephole. There is no one there. He shrugs it off and walks toward his bedroom. He climbs back into bed and drifts off to sleep. The doorbell rings again, but this time he ignores it. Minutes later, someone knocks on his window. He ignores it. 5 minutes later, the doorbell rings again. Scott gets up in a huff.
All right, enough is enough. Jimmy Connor,
He gets out of bed, puts on his robe, grabs a baseball bat, and marches toward the front door.
Okay, you little bastards. I'm ready for you this time.
Scott grabs the door and opens it. His face turns white as a sheet. He is startled at the sight of an apparition standing there. From its features, it looks like Clyde. Scott backs away and slams the door.
Oh, he's come for me. He's come for me. No, no.
Scott runs to his room, grabs his car and house keys. In his heart, he knew that something bad was coming for him, and it was not going to stop until he was dead. A loud bang comes from the living room. Scott runs into the living room and notices that the front door is wide open. He looks around. The atmosphere feels heavy and damp. The hairs begin to tingle on the back of his neck as he runs toward the front door. The apparition manifests and reaches out to grab him. In a panic, Scott runs into the kitchen toward the sliding glass door and sees a fluorescent glow coming from an adjacent room. He opens the door, barely escaping its ice-cold grip. He gets into his car and takes off. 10 minutes later, he pulls into town and finds an all-night bar and ducks inside.
I bet he won't try nothing here.
The bartender turns on the intercom and makes an announcement.
Attention, friends. The bar will be closing in 10 minutes.
10 minutes? No!
Scott looks out of the window of the bar and sees the apparition hovering there. He walks outside as patrons leave the bar, gets into his car and drives to an old abandoned church, then ducks inside. Those words echoed throughout the empty building.
You have no power here.
As Scott turns around, he sees the vengeful specter with half of its face missing.
Time to die, Scott.
The apparition takes possession of Scott's body, causing him to leave the church, get into his car, and drive towards Deadwood. The car reaches the edge of a forest and stops. Scott gets out and walks into the woods, surrounded by total darkness. The sound of grunts and ghostly moans fill the air. A portal opens in front of Scott. From its depths, a lonely demon emerges and attacks Scott with its claws, disfiguring his face. The demon wrestles Scott to the ground, grabs him by his feet, and drags him kicking and screaming back through the portal. Clyde's apparition reappears near the portal, disappears, and reappears near the big white house, and phases through the front door. The next day, back in St. Augustine, Randall Swindle, an attorney representing Clyde's estate, contacts his next of kin, 20-year-old Gerald Hanks.
Mr. Hanks, I'm Randall Swindle of Big Bang Law Firm. First of all, let me extend my condolences. Your father was scheduled to start his new job last week. When the staff didn't hear from him, they sent out a search party to discover his whereabouts. Last week, his tattered clothes along with his wallet were found in Spikes Peak Forest, 20 miles from his home. No, it can't. Not my father. Does anyone know what happened? Not a clue. But because of the nature of the crime, a special task force has been assembled to assist local police in solving the case. What do you mean by nature of the case? Why, paranormal activity, of course. The police is still looking into the nature of the crime.
Gerald drives out to see his newfound property. He unlocks the door and walks inside, closing the door behind him. Clyde's spirit appears in the second floor window and then disappears. The end.